I know the oxygen level in the room is low, but maybe I can stir up your adrenaline a little bit. I'm not going to use my PowerPoint deck because that would take us too long, and I'm going to condense this down to a very short discussion about these things we've been hearing. Where are the gallium-68 scans in Canada? Where's the yttrium therapy, the lutetium therapy? Indeed, where are the octreotide scans? I want to tell you a story about how the situation we're in. And I know that when the so-called isotope crisis emerged last summer, we had a lot of phone calls from patients who were saying, how's this going to affect me? You know, we have a proud background in Canada that we were producing as much as 2/3 of the world's reactor-produced medical isotopes until a little while ago, and the world was fairly comfortable with the supply. The Americans had never thought to build their own domestic supply of isotope production because they thought that they could rely on us. There's a lot of anger in the world now, and there's a sense that because of the situation that has emerged, that Canada has betrayed medicine around the world. And I think people have said that, and I think there's some truth in that, and I accept the embarrassment that this is causing us. What has happened is that Atomic Energy of Canada, which is the Crown-owned corporation that has sort of managed the pre-commercial nuclear industry in Canada since 1950 or earlier, has needed some refurbishing for a long time. They have a research reactor out of which we produced medical isotopes as one of the things that this reactor did. I know that I and others have been agitating serial federal governments for 20 years to say you have to put some money into renewing this, and the anti-nuclear community in Canada has managed to repeatedly frighten serial governments who thought they would lose a lot of electoral support if they funded renewal at Chalk River. So our current government believes that the free market will do all these things, and the Prime Minister wants to sell AECL to one of two international consortia, neither of them with roots in Canada. And he wanted to get, I think, the medical isotope situation off the table. We were building, there was a reactor program to build two so-called MAPLE reactors that were to be the first reactors in the world ever devoted to medical isotopes exclusively. There were some problems in the run-in period, and an announcement was made without any consultation of the medical community as to what the effect would be that this construction was scrapped. The experts, the physicists and engineers who were doing the tuning up of the reactor when the project was stopped tell me, and they have said in this at the standing committee at the House of Commons on this, that they were within 3 months of a solution when they were told to stop. And many of us are still agitating the government to own up to the embarrassment of this and to go back and finish the job of qualifying these reactors. In the meantime, the NRU reactor that has been producing medical isotopes week in, week out for 52 years developed a leak. And that created a problem because there are only 5 reactors in the world that are capable of producing medical isotopes. And the youngest of these is 46 years old. So, and there is a new reactor in Australia that is not up to production yet because they also have had run-in problems. If you only build these things every 50 years or so, you can imagine it takes a little tuning time. So they're not in production yet. The Canadian reactor was the only one operating with a capacity that had some reserve left in case the world needed more isotopes. So it's now going to be out of action until at least next spring because they've had to develop some exotic tooling in order to do some remote welding in this rusty reactor tank. So we've lost our place in the world. We've certainly lost our market, the business plan. The Americans have now passed legislation in their House to allocate the money to build American sources of isotopes, so we won't get the market back. We needed the reactors to produce molybdenum for technetium, and neuroendocrine patients that, like others with cancer, sometimes need bone scans and kidney scans and so on. And we've had to be very careful about how we use medical isotopes of the technetium generators for the last months since this crisis began. And sometimes our technologists across the country really are owed a debt of thanks, because I've seen them come in on a Friday night when a new generator arrives, and rather than wait till Monday to do stuff, they worked Friday night and they worked through Saturday and Sunday to get as many cases as done as possible before generator decay precludes further work with that generator. So we have failed, and there was the other thing that would have been a bit of a hiccup but could have been managed as coming along at the same time is that the United States is nervous about these reactors continuing to use highly enriched uranium-235 to produce molybdenum. And the issue is that they are afraid that these sources will fall into the hands of people who would do something nasty with dirty bombs and the like. So they want us to use 20% rather than 93% enriched uranium. And there is a whole new technology that all the systems in the world that are producing moly need to get into, and that will take some years as well. Now, we also, the irony is that, at least in some cases, the people from Canada who are going to Europe to receive lutetium and yttrium therapies are being treated there with isotopes that may have been produced in Canada. So it's a long trip around to meet up. Now, what are we going to do? We have then also some internal things downstream from the nuclear production. People often say, well, these things aren't approved in Canada. As recently as a week ago, I was beating on people from Health Canada who are saying, well, you should try us because we are developing a new approach to orphan drugs, and come around and see us and we'll tell you what we're thinking about. So there's an opportunity there to say, well, okay, so Health Canada might give us approvals to use these agents for diagnosis and therapy. But that doesn't really solve the problem. At least it doesn't solve the problem in Ontario. And Mark is tired of hearing about this because last week he heard about the problems we have with PET in Ontario, and now we're going to talk about the neuroendocrine tumor isotopes. Because we can come forward and say Health Canada has approved this agent for this purpose, and but then our hospitals will say, well, you're not going to order any of this stuff until we see a line of funding from the province. And we go to the province and they say, okay, show us your level 1 evidence. Where is your prospective placebo-controlled randomized trial? They held us up on PET for 11 years that way, and they're still holding us back. They opened the door a crack last month for the first time. We have the situation that even an octreotide scan is not funded in Ontario as such. And the reason, and last week I was interviewed by somebody who was doing a survey, and I didn't get where they're from, but they may be from the ministry, who said to me, well, we're getting this message that nuclear medicine docs in the community are saying, oh, it's not a very important scan, we hardly do any of them, and the oncologists don't pay any attention to them. And then we heard other people saying, well, they're splitting the dose and not lengthening the imaging time, and so these scans are very information poor, and we don't think they're of diagnostic quality. And so one frustration is feeding into the other, and we're not getting anywhere. And we put in a request for a proper fee for the cost of an octreotide scan more than 5 years ago, and as of this week, it's still sitting in a queue in which The medical review has been favorable. It was passed 5 years ago, but it hasn't been funded yet. So how are we going to fix this thing? We think the issue is bigger than Ontario because although Ontario is a third of the Canadian population, there are other provinces who will never be able to provide for their own patients and who need to have some place to go. And so the thing has to have some kind of fix that everybody in the country buys into. And so I'm hoping that somehow in this country, some people will step forward and say, I want to be part of a network of excellence or the like that would take responsibility for negotiating standard guidelines down to the details of how these things should be imaged and how they're used in treatment one by one, developing a proper national database, and then we could perhaps go to the funders and say to them, look guys, there is the need, and we need the CNET Society for that, because you are the people who are having the disease and you are the people who are caring for people with disease in your homes. Here is the need, and where is the funding? And we're willing to be responsible, and we'll make registries, we'll examine our outcomes, we'll stay on top of the literature, and we will publish what we learn and contribute to the body of knowledge. I'm not going to be the guy who charges ahead and does this, but I don't see that we can make progress, at least in my province, unless something bigger than just a provincial situation sort of breaks out. I'm very proud of my colleagues, and I've supported them in London for years, who have provided neuroendocrine tumor support, but they're now limited to looking after patients who live within our so-called LIN, our health district. And they're cut off from, increasingly the budgets are saying you can't do this, you can't do that. And so I know that some of you in the room have had frustration over that. I hope that there will be some thinking and strategizing, and I know that Maureen and Jim are interested in this to see how we can break this up and get somewhere with it. So that's my piece. So now questions for